All right, we're starting our unit on East Asian medieval empires. Today's goal is for you to be able to explain how different philosophies and the Qin dynasty unified China after the collapse of the Zhou dynasty. So, if you think back to Unit 1, the last time we talked about China, which is way back at the beginning of the school year, we were talking about the Zhou dynasty and how it kind of collapsed into this period of warring states. What we're going to be covering in today's lesson is this period from about 250 BCE to about 200 CE, what happened in between the Zhou dynasty and the reunification of China. To help orient yourself in history, you should be aware that we've taken a step back on the timeline, and we're talking about what's going on in China around the period of the Punic Wars going on in the Mediterranean Sea. You remember that's during the Roman Republic. These are the wars between the city of Rome and the city of Carthage. And we're really only about a century after the death of Alexander the Great, and we're still a couple centuries away from Julius Caesar being assassinated, Buddhism spreading to India, the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, and the beginning of the Roman Empire. So right here, this is the period we're looking at in today's lesson. First question we're going to be trying to answer here is what problems followed the fall of the Zhou dynasty? So you might remember from Unit 1, and this is good to review for the final exam, which will be covering all of this, the Zhou dynasty fell or lost control to powerful local warlords around the year 475 BCE. This is what we call the Warring States period. So China is no longer unified by one single emperor. Instead, it's a bunch of different little empires or kingdoms fighting each other. So this constant warfare destroyed the crops, destroyed cities, and really destroyed trust in what we talked about in the first unit, the mandate of heaven. So that mandate of heaven is this idea that people have the right to rule over others in China because the gods will it. However, the constant chaos brought by warfare, instability, and suffering, this led to the people of China believing that the gods no longer favored the Zhou family. This constant warfare brought chaos, instability, and suffering all across East Asia in the area of the Chinese Empire. Traditional Chinese values of respect, loyalty, and harmony began to break down, and peasants and nobles sought new ways to restore order because the emperor just couldn't do it anymore. This leads to the birth of a philosophy known as Confucianism. So let's take a look at how Confucius tried to restore order and harmony in China. Confucius was a teacher that lived between 551 and 479 BCE, living during this chaotic period of the Warring States, and he believed that order came from proper behavior. As part of his teachings, he taught there were 5 key relationships that had to be respected. It's these relationships that brought stability. So the first relationship was the subject to the ruler, which mirrored the relationship of the son to the father, the wife to the husband, the younger brother to the older brother, and the friend to the friend. So you can see, at least in the first 4 of here, it's the subject who has to obey the ruler, the son who has to obey the father, the wife has to obey the husband, younger brother has to obey the older brother, and then of course at the bottom it's friends have to respect each other. Confucianism taught that everyone should know their role in society and act with kindness, loyalty, and respect. The focus here was on respect and duty to one's parents and ancestors, and the family was really the training ground for good government because you respected your father and obeyed your father the same way that everyone should respect and obey the emperor, as the emperor was seen as kind of the father of the Chinese people. Now, the goal of all this was for whoever is in the dominant part of the relationship, the emperor, the father, the husband, the older brother, the people in these dominant positions had the responsibility to set a moral example for those that were their subordinates. The younger brother, the wife, the son. So the dominant person was setting the example for the subordinate person in the society, and that's how you kept stability. So let's take a look at what role Confucianism played in government and society during this period. Confucius believed that rulers should lead by virtue and example, not through fear. Virtue is a behavior showing high moral standards. That is, leaders should lead by example by doing the right thing. Why should you do the right thing? Because I, your dominant superior, am doing the right thing, and you should follow my example. This is different from other rulers who said, you should follow what I say because, well, I'll hurt you if you don't. It was also believed under Confucianism that education could turn anyone into, quote, a gentleman who served the public. That is, someone who's highly educated, whose job it was to make sure society operated properly. This led to the idea of what we call a bureaucracy, trained officials chosen for the ability to actually do their jobs, right? That means they get the job because they know what they're doing, not just because they're a member of a royal family. It's these government officials were supposed to show honesty, fairness, and actually care for the people of the empire. In short, Confucianism became the moral foundation of Chinese society, but it's important to understand Confucianism is not a religion, it's a way of life, a philosophy. A big part of this was that merit mattered more than birth, that is, earning something, not just being given it. A second philosophy that developed around this time that also played a big role in shaping Chinese society and really our world today is Taoism, which offered a different path to harmony. Taoism taught that humans should live according to the Tao, that is, according to the way, a force that guides all things. Yes, if this sounds familiar, it's because George Lucas heavily borrowed from Taoism as an inspiration for the Force in Star Wars. Taoism said that laws and ambition for power created conflict, so people should live simply and just follow what nature says. People were encouraged to live peaceful, self-controlled lives and just accept what's happening in life rather than struggling against it. And while there wasn't direct contact between China and Greece, this definitely follows the same teachings as Stoicism that was taught by Greek philosophers and later adopted by the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Again, these ideas developed separately from each other, but have a lot of similarities. Taoists valued silence, nature, and meditation over politics. It was this balance of action with calm and reflection. It led to discoveries in alchemy, astronomy, and medicine. Alchemy, if you're not aware, is basically a precursor to chemistry. It was a mix of what we call chemistry today and magic. And then there's a third philosophy we have to talk about called legalism, which was, some said, the key to restoring order in China. Well, Confucianism taught that leaders should lead by moral example, and there should be a dominant and subordinate relationships that should be respected. And Taoism taught just follow the way of nature. Legalism, on the other hand, taught that people are naturally selfish and only obey if there are strict laws and harsh punishments. So loyalty should be rewarded, and disobedience should have a very severe penalty. And that's how you get people to obey and create stability. Our friends, the Roman emperors, would probably agree with this. As part of legalism, the government controlled actions and ideas of everyone in the empire. They ordered books to be burned and censorship of ideas that conflicted with the teachings or ideas and laws of the emperor. So the idea here was that government power should be absolute. The ruler's word is law, and whatever the ruler says goes. Anything against that has to be destroyed. If you don't, that will eventually lead to rebellion, so this is how you keep order. This sets the stage for Shi Hongdai and the Qin dynasty to unify all of China. By about 221 BCE, the Qin king ended the warring states and declared himself Shi Hongdai, or First Emperor. For reference, back over the Mediterranean Sea, the Romans and Carthaginians are about halfway through their Punic Wars. Now, since the Qin ended this period of warring states where these different little kingdoms fighting each other, the Qin really weren't fond of the idea of that chaos starting up again, and so legalism really appealed to them as a way to strengthen control of their new empire. As part of this, they forced noble families to move away from their local centers of power to the capital city itself so they could control the nobles better and avoid another warring states period. They also killed anyone who criticized them, burned books they considered useless, like those of Confucianism, historical books, or just literary works of art. They then created an autocracy, a government with unlimited power with the emperor at its head. Let's take a look at how Shi Hongdai centralized and strengthened China. First and foremost, they standardized writing so everyone would be using the same writing system regardless of the language you spoke. They established a common currency, reformed the laws, created a standard set of weights so everyone measured things the same way, even a standard axle width for carts so that they could be using all the roads could be built to one standard. And now that they've standardized the axle length, so they know how wide all carts are going to be in the empire, they built over 4,000 miles of highways, which encourage trade and communication all across their empire. Again, just like the Romans, roads are key to the Qin dynasty's empire. They also created large irrigation projects to increase farm production. This allowed for more food production for the large population of China. Again, a key way to stop people rebelling against you is just make sure their bellies are full. But one of the big problems here was that they had very, very heavy taxes, and they used a lot of forced labor, which caused deep resentment among the people. So essentially, the people were heavily taxed for these projects, and then forced to do the work of building all of them. People didn't like this. So while they unified China politically and economically, they gave the people of China very limited freedom, which, again, is kind of common with China today. It's during this period we saw an expansion of what we now call the Great Wall of China. So, what is the purpose and cost of the Great Wall of China? Well, first and foremost, it was designed to protect from the Mongol nomadic people up here in this area who are coming down to Chinese territories. And this wall actually predated the Qin. There are actually smaller walls built by earlier states that the Qin just kind of unified into a single cohesive wall. So you can see this color coding here of all the different walls built by different dynasties, the green being the Qin, this orange color being those that existed before them. Now, this wall was built by hundreds of thousands of peasants forced to do this work under brutal conditions, and many died. In fact, in some parts of the wall, they actually, when someone died, they just kept building the wall over the person's body and just kind of left them where they were. So the wall becomes a symbol of both unity of China, but also the tyranny of the Qin dynasty. So you could probably predict why the Qin dynasty fell pretty quickly. So let's get into that. So the harsh taxes, the forced labor, and the heavy censorship of ideas caused a lot of anger among the people of China. Also, Shi Hongdai's son was a really weak and cruel leader, so he was not nearly as strong as his father, and he was much crueler, and this led to revolts breaking out. Now, Shi Hongdai himself is well renowned for his terracotta army that was buried with him by his burial site, his mausoleum, which is said to actually have been built underground and be a kind of miniature version of all of China, with the rivers all being represented by a flowing river of liquid mercury, and then the ceiling had a bunch of jewels all over it to reflect the constellations of the night sky at the time he died. Now, while we've dug up the terracotta army, we've never actually made it inside his mausoleum because of the way it was constructed in booby traps. So no one's actually been inside to confirm what it actually looks like inside there. So how did philosophy and power together unify China? Let's take a look and wrap this up. Confucianism restored moral order through respect and education. Taoism offered the people balance and peace with nature. Legalism provided the strict laws and authority that were necessary to end the warring states period. And Shi Hongdi's use of legalism unified China politically, but without any compassion. So together, these philosophies define Chinese culture and government for the next 2,000 years, and even plays a role in today's Chinese culture. Alright, in class we're going to be looking at what comes next after the Qin dynasty, which is the Han dynasty, which usually gets compared to the Roman Empire. We'll get into that in class. But for now, please rewrite today's goal. Use 3 complete sentences to write what 3 facts or ideas help you understand today's goal. Again, write these out. Don't copy and paste. This is all about helping you remember this information. And then write 1 question that I'll respond to. The goal of all this at the end is always to get you to do something with the information, and that's going to help it stick in your head so that you can use it later in life, but more importantly for you at this point, the upcoming unit test at the end of this unit. All right, that's all I got for you today. We'll see you in next class.